are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, everybody. My name is John Lawless on behalf of Family Process Institute. Welcome to this webinar by Kaethe Weingarten. The personal is the professional is the political, therapeutic practices in everyday life. As I said, my name is John Lawless. I'm the treasurer and member of the webinar committee for Family Process Institute. I want to thank the committee for putting this together, which includes Vicki Dickerson, who you can see, and myself, and as well as Kaethe, and Jason Black. So thank you. As a reminder, you will be muted throughout the course of the webinar. If you want to ask questions, or please do so in the chat box. For clarifying questions, if you're not understanding the material, Dr. Dickerson will be looking at the chat section so she can interrupt Dr. Weingarten to ask her those questions. But we'll also be collecting questions as well too throughout, and Dr. Dickerson will ask those toward the end or throughout, depending on the type of question. We encourage you to use the chat function. Just in advance, we apologize. We may not be able to get to everybody's question, but we'll try to collate them together so we'll get as many of those questions answered as possible. As a reminder, too, we are recording the webinar. It will be posted on the Family Process Institute's YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/familyprocess1. So if you just go to YouTube and search for Family Process, you'll find us. And we'll also post this on Twitter and Facebook when it is available. So with that, I'm going to introduce Dr. Dickerson. Dr. Vicki Dickerson is a clinician and author, teacher of narrative ideas and practices. She is the associate editor of technology and new media for Family Process, and she teaches at various universities, does workshops nationally, internationally, and has written numerous articles, book chapters, and 2 books. Her publications include recent articles in Family Process. With that, I will leave it over to Vicki to introduce Dr. Weingarten.
Thank you, John. I'm glad you introduced yourself this time. It's a great pleasure to introduce Kaethe Weingarten. Kaethe has been a friend of mine and a colleague for over 20 years, and I'm tempted to tell stories about our relationship, but I think instead I will do a more formal introduction. Kaethe Weingarten is a clinical psychologist, a peace psychologist, and a family therapist who has recently moved from Boston to Berkeley. She was an associate clinical professor of psychology in the Harvard Medical School Department of Psychiatry from 1981 to 2013. and a faculty member of the Family Institute of Cambridge from 1982 until its close in 2009. There she founded and directed the program in Families, Trauma, and Resilience. She is founder and director of the Witnessing Project, a nonprofit organization that consults to individuals, families, and communities locally, nationally, and internationally to transform passive witnessing of violence and violation into effective action. And I know that Dr. Weingarten will be talking about some of that today, and she'll probably show you her website for the Witnessing Project. She has over 90 publications, including 6 books. Her book, Common Shock, which I'll show you here, and you can also see it on her slide. Her book, Common Shock, Witnessing Violence Every Day, How We Are Harmed, How We Can Heal, won the Nautilus Award for Social Change. One of the first ways I've met Kaethe Weingarten was through this book, The Mother's Voice, which came out in 1994, which is also a classic. In addition to her professional work, Kaethe and her husband are also actively engaged with their 4 grandchildren who live nearby. And with that, I'm really very happy to introduce Kaethe, and I think we will all profit from this presentation, and afterwards I will show you how to access some of her publications on the Family Process website. So thank you, Kaethe. It's all yours.
Thank you, Vicki. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I know that there are people who signed up for this webinar in all parts of the planet, different time zones, so thank you for showing up. If you've signed up for the webinar, I don't think you have to be convinced of the first proposition, which is that the personal is the professional, is the political. It's the ideal, and what I'm going to be talking about is some reasons why it is the ideal. And the point here is that all three domains are aligned with our values, and when that happens, we really feel effective in the world, and I think we have a much greater probability of doing good than harm. But at the same time, I am imagining that if you are listening, you're doing so because you know that it's not so easy to do. It's hard to align the three domains, to make what we know personally, what we know professionally, what we know politically to line up with values. And it is for everybody, and certainly for me, and it's something that I've spent the last really several decades of my life trying to do. So in my case, I would say that I've worked very hard to use what I've learned in my personal life in my professional life. And those of you who read two of my recent articles on sorrow and the cruel radiance of what is will know that I've tried to use what I know about illness and dying in my professional writing. Many colleagues come to mind as people who've used what they understand politically in their clinical lives. And I think Michael White and David Epstein are prime examples of that, and people whose work probably many or even most of you know well. Laura Chasin is a Boston colleague of mine who started the Public Conversations Project, and I think this is a terrific example. The work of the Public Conversations Project is a terrific example of somebody who took, people who took what they know clinically into the political realm. Most therapists leave the office and apply how they work with other people to their own lives. But there are still dicey situations for us interpersonally and politically. Some of the time, our behavior in these domains is actually not in alignment with our values. And I've come to realize that when this happens, very often the difficulty is in how we are responding to what we are witnessing. And here I don't mean witnessing happy situations, because I think most of us don't have much difficulty knowing what to do, how to respond to a happy, a joyful situation. The dicey situations, I think, much more often involve being a witness to a situation of violence or violation, one of those kinds of situations. So, for example, when I was kind of writing these notes, I had already had a couple of emails yesterday, and then another one came in this morning, which really surprised me, learning about the serious illness or death of a friend or a friend's family member. And even when you learn about this by email, there's a need to respond. Another situation that can be very dicey is observing a hostile transaction between a couple of people and being uncertain what to do. And this happened to me just the other day, witnessing a hostile situation between a pedestrian and a homeless person. So these are just, two very simple examples, very recent examples in my life of when it can be confusing to figure out how to stay aligned, how to feel certain about, confident really, about how to respond. Now, about 25 years ago, I developed a model of witnessing to help account for these kinds of confusing situations. And just so we're all on the same page, about the terms that I'm going to be using. Let me just make a set of distinctions for a moment. You know, I think most of what we read about focuses on the victim and perpetrator in situations of violence and violation. But in fact, most of our lives, we are witnesses, not victims or perpetrators. And I think, fortunately, increasingly, people are coming to appreciate just how significant witnessing is. For example, if you just take the situation of bullying, which is surely ubiquitous, schools do now address the role of the witness, not just the victim and the bully. And one of the things that I've kept track of over the decades is how, in what way, the word witness appears in newspapers and magazines. And it used to be that the word witness pretty much only appeared in the context of a legal situation, that is, a witness to a crime. Whereas now, I think newspapers and magazines do often write about witnesses, and where there's a understanding that witnesses are subject to the same dynamics as the victim. So again, just to be sure that we're all on the same page about terms, what constitutes witnessing? So the literature says, and this is my kind of condensation of that, that witnessing occurs when there's simultaneous observation. That is, we see or hear something, and also when we learn about something after the event. You can be a witness by learning about an event. And you can realize what you've witnessed, or recognition can be delayed. Now, the witnessing model puts together bystander theory, which was developed in the 1960s before the most recent work on trauma theory got underway, and trauma theory. And I'm going to be speaking later about the new concept of moral injury and showing how this also links to the witnessing model. And the witnessing model asks a very simple question. It asks the question, why do some people act constructively and some people don't act in a constructive manner when they are witnesses to violence and violation? So here is a grid. It's a pretty simple grid, and some of you may have seen this before. And there are two dimensions that are represented on the axes. The one on the top is awareness, and the one going down is empowerment. So what do I mean by aware and unaware? Well, the aware axis means that you're registering what you see, hear, or learn about. And if you're unaware, it means you're not registering what you see, hear, or are learning about. In terms of empowerment, if you have a sense of you're knowing what to do and you're doing it, well, that is one way of understanding what it means to feel, to be empowered. And if you're disempowered, then there are, for internal or external reasons, you're not doing what would be helpful to do. So, one, empowered is the feeling of being able to take action, and disempowered is the other, is not feeling able to take action. And if you put these two dimensions together, you get four, not one, but four possible witness positions. And I'm going to walk you through these positions in a very simplified example. So let's just say we have a person lying on the ground who's in a hypoglycemic coma. And now I'm going to represent each of these positions by four different people, four different witnesses. And I'm going to start in the red square, number 2 on the slide. And I just parenthetically, I've used the color symbol like a traffic light, where red is stop, green is go, yellow is kind of in the middle. So I'm going to start in square number 2, the red square. So now we remember we have a person lying on the ground who's in a hypoglycemic coma. And a person walks by the person on the ground and says in a very authoritative voice to others who are onlookers, who are looking around, and saying, "Ah, that person's just drunk," and walks off. They are unaware of what is really going on, of what they're witnessing, but they're empowered. They have empowered. They've authorized themselves to take a position, and they broadcast that position. If we move to square number 3 and we think about, okay, another person is walking by, let's just say that that person's on her cell phone, and she kind of glances over at the person on the ground, shudders, and keeps talking. That person's in denial, doesn't really want to see, doesn't want to make herself aware of what it is that she's just seen. And now we have a third witness, or passerby. Another person walks by and looks and registers, actually is aware of what she's seeing. She thinks that something terrible is happening. But she feels helpless because she doesn't feel she has the skill to know what to do. And she's forgotten her cell phone. So she doesn't feel that she can say anything to any of the onlookers, and she just walks by, and she ends up feeling bad, feeling guilty. And then finally, we have a witness who is in the green square, square number 1. And that person comes, sees that somebody's on the ground, kneels down, and because she has EMT, emergency medical training, she realizes that the person is in trouble and calls 911 on her cell. And perhaps even more, she notices that they have a diabetic wristband, and she's able to say something to the onlookers, in a sense to convert them from skeptics to sympathizers. So in terms of acting in alignment with our values across the 3 domains, my first point is this, that thinking about where we are on the witnessing grid is helpful. I can ask myself, am I aware of what there is to be aware of? And what can I do that will make a difference, even if it's only a small difference? Because you see, what I am trying to do in order to feel aligned across the clinical, the personal, professional, and the political domain is I am trying to end up to bring myself into the green square, to be an aware and empowered person. Now, many professions suffer from an overexposure to violence and violation. As healthcare professionals, that's certainly true of us. Journalists do, clergy, just to name a few. And if they end up, if we end up in any of the positions besides the aware and empowered position, there's a very real possibility that our actions or inactions may have deleterious effects. So here, let's just imagine that we're going back through the squares, and I'm starting with the unaware and empowered square. That was the red square on the top right in the previous slide. And now let's imagine we have a healthcare professional who's dealing with a client, and they are unaware of what they're witnessing, but they're empowered. Well, their comments may very well be misguided. If they're not only unaware of what they're witnessing, but they are disempowered and they use a kind of a dissociative position or denial, well, they're likely to be abandoning the client. If they're quite aware of what it is they're being told, but they feel helpless, or they just don't know what to do, or they know what to do, but they don't feel like there are the available resources to help them do what could be done, they may feel very ineffectual and stressed. And then finally, again, the position that we're hoping for is that a healthcare professional, that is we, will feel effective and competent as we are aware of what it is our clients talk to us about, tell us about, and we have a sense of what it is that we can do. That is, we feel empowered. Now, the effects are not just effects that happen in a one-on-one encounter or with a family or even a community. Sometimes people occupy positions from which the effects of what they do or they don't do ripple out very widely. And an example that has still remained with me, although I think that this happened on the radio maybe even a decade ago. I was listening to a radio interview of a UNICEF ambassador, and the journalist had asked questions about conditions in a refugee camp. And when the woman began describing them, the journalist just froze. She was unable to speak. Her inability to respond, to offer a reflection, to acknowledge what the ambassador said, clearly communicated her horror. But it also left dangling something that really should have been addressed. My guess is that she was mildly traumatized by what she was hearing. She was acutely aware of what was being described, but she felt paralyzed about how to find an appropriate response, so she did nothing. Now, she may have felt disempowered. That is, she may have lacked the skills to make an appropriate comment. But she was in a position of power. So her non-response had consequences to all of those who were in her audience. And my guess is that she was unaware of the effect her non-response could have. She didn't see herself as being in the empowered position at that moment, but she actually was. So my second point is about the potentially devastating effects of doing nothing. Now, clinically, I think this is something that we know. We work with emerging therapists in training to help them understand that sometimes doing nothing, a non-response, can be devastating. So, for instance, a therapist who fails to intervene during a session when a family member is abusive to another family member is making a really big statement to the family, and I think a dangerous one. If the therapist cannot take on abuse, well, who in the family is going to feel empowered to do so? So that's an example, and I think we appreciate that. We train, we work with people to understand the potentially devastating effects of doing nothing. You know, one of the earliest sentences I remember from my very beginning training in family therapy in the early 1970s was a supervisor of mine, Carter Umbarger, saying, you know, the letter not sent contains as much information as the sent letter. Now, my next example comes from a family with whom I'm acquainted, and this family gave permission for me to use their situation as an illustration. It may take me a little bit of time to set up the point using this illustration, but it's a rich one, and it allows me to make several of the points. So last Monday, as some of you may know, was January 12th, and it was the 5th anniversary of the Haitian earthquake. And this particular anecdote concerns 7 family members from Haiti who currently live in a Boston suburb. There's a maternal grandmother, adult sisters, and their children who all live together in a Boston suburb. And this is a Catholic family, and they regularly attend Mass. And they found out that on the Sunday, January 11th, before the 5th anniversary, the regular priest was not going to be with the parish, but a visiting priest was going to be there. And as a consequence, one of the daughters in the family, one of the adult daughters, realized that this new priest might not recall that there was a Haitian family in the parish, and might not say anything to the family during the sermon. But she imagined that if she wrote a note, it would be possible for the priest to offer some consoling words. When the family got to the church and they sat down in their regular pew, the daughter realized that she actually had no way of reaching the priest, and so she scribbled or wrote, not scribbled, I mean, she's very good handwriting, wrote an announcement that she could give to the announcement coordinator. This is a church that had a routine of people from the congregation passing along announcements that they wanted the announcement coordinator to read, either before, during, or after the Mass. So she did pass along the announcement that the next day was the 5th anniversary of the Haitian earthquake, and hand-delivered it to the announcement coordinator. And during the Mass, nothing was said, and after Mass, the announcement coordinator said to her, "I won't be able to get to this today. The program is just too full." And our friend was really speechless, and she, it showed on her face, and the announcement coordinator said, "Well, I tried, I just couldn't, sorry." Well, it turned out that there were 3 announcements that had been made, and one was to remind them about an extra collection for the charity. One was to tell people that the poinsettias could be taken home now that the Christmas season was over. And the third was shouted from the back of the church, saying that there are more decorations and they would love some help taking them down. And at that point, Mass ended. Well, our friend was, kind of stunned, and she went up in the line to speak to the priest, and she mumbled something to the priest before her mother, and said to him, "Could you please say something to my mother?" And the priest said to her, "What happened?" And she said very, very quickly that they had lost their home, everything in it, many family members, friends, the means of livelihood. And when her mother arrived, he said, tell me what happened." And the mother was embarrassed. She was on the line. There were other people before. She sort of mumbled something and repeating what her daughter had said to him. And he looked at her and said nothing. Now, the announcement coordinator had the power to meet or reject the announcement request, and was unaware of the effect not making the announcement would have on this family. The priest was at first unaware, but then he became aware, but he felt disempowered. Once informed, he was silent. He didn't know what to say. He was paralyzed, and so he said nothing. The family left disappointed, sad, and they felt marginalized. Their tragedy was less important to acknowledge than the Patriots' win, which had been mentioned in the Mass, and the poinsettias. Now, I have to say, we learned about this story through an email. And when my husband and I first read the email, we felt aware but disempowered. And then we said, okay, and I am always thinking about, okay, how am I feeling? Where am I on the grid? I realized that I was feeling disempowered. And then we said, well, okay, we can call her and just tell her how sorry we are that this happened. And then a few days later, I realized I could use this as a teaching story. And so I wrote her an email and asked whether she could ask the family's permission for me to tell this anecdote, what had happened to them, as an illustration. And they said yes, that the family would feel better knowing that some good could come of the experience that they had had. So here's my third point. Believing that something that we do that's small is not trivial can actually help us figure out how to move from an aware and disempowered position into an aware and empowered position. That is, into the green square. What we did was obviously very small, but it offered the family some consolation. Now, here's another example from a few years back, and I love it because I think it is another very clear example about how something small need not be trivial. Our daughter, Miranda, has a really good friend with whom she went to graduate school who's now working in the Gambia. And a few years ago, Miranda wrote to her to let her know that her dad had been diagnosed with cancer. And I'm going to show you a slide. It's not going to make much sense to you for another moment or two, but it will. So her friend Paola wrote her the following email. My dearest, I am so sorry to hear about your dad. I've been thinking how useless I feel by sending you emails about your dad and how I could possibly bring a smile to your face all the way from the Gambia. Well, after careful thinking, I remembered how you loved pancakes, and I thought pancakes could be the answer. So what I did is I invited a few people over, cooked banana and chocolate chip pancakes for all, and then asked someone to take some pictures that I could send to my friend Miranda, who is the author of the Pancakes of Joy recipe. Well, they all celebrated you as the author of the recipe, and your recipe, of course, it's so yummy, and I now really, really hope that these pictures will bring you a smile. I guess the Pancakes of Joy can now also officially be the pancakes of transoceanic friendship and smile-making. Well, Miranda shared this email with us, and it helped. We laughed and laughed, and now it's many years later, and I'm still teaching from this anecdote. It still makes me smile. And her dad wrote back, funny email, and he concluded by saying, I think I did read something about an experimental cancer treatment in phase 2 trials that involves pancakes. So that is an example where Paula felt aware but disempowered. But because she wasn't searching for a world-shattering, cancer-curing action she could take, but had the idea that something small could make an important difference, she made pancakes, and it actually has made a difference. Now, sometimes, consciously or unconsciously, we believe that it's just too hard to move into the aware and empowered position. So instead, we slide into the unaware and disempowered position. That is, we move over, not up. And I was teaching in a community mental health team setting in the Boston area, and I put this slide up, and a team leader of a community mental health team in the Boston area kind of blurted out and said, "Oh, that explains why I go home and veg out in front of the TV." And later on, she went on to explain that sometimes that she can feel so overwhelmed by the situations that she faces, and more often than not, the lack of external, not internal, but external resources she has to bring to bear upon the situation, that she does believe that if she kind of moves into a vegging out mode, if she just moves into unawareness, it'll be easier for her. And of course, there are lots of ways of doing that, of which TV is only one, and you can see on your screen some other ways of doing that. But I think all of us would agree, and here is my fourth point, that while we may get some temporary relief from being in this position, there is no actual relief, true relief, permanent relief, unless it's aligned with our values. When we're aware and empowered and aligned with our values, I think actually rather than feeling drained or depleted by what we're doing, we feel energized. So, clinicians have a lot of skills that make it easier for us to move up, not over. But there may be messages that interfere with our using those skills. We can be afraid that if we do, people will be critical of us. And I think there are a number of kinds or clusters of messages that can get in the way of our transferring what we know clinically to our everyday lives. And I'm going to mention just a few, and you may have others, and if you do, you can send a message to Vicki about them. So a family message. Somebody might say, you know, who do you think you are? Or, oh no, here we go with that touchy-feely crap. Or there may be a cultural set of messages, a cultural discourse where psychology itself is ridiculed. So there's a kind of a belittling of our knowledge. And then, of course, since in terms of alignment, really talking about the interplay of the personal, the professional, and the political, it's also the case that there are many professional discourses that say to us we have to maintain boundaries, and by that they mean that we're supposed to act as if our personal lives don't exist outside of the therapy room, and by no means is it correct to bring anything about our personal life into the clinical situation. But in fact, I think that when we act in alignment, it feels right to us, and then it feels right to others. And I think that sense of rightness is really what neutralizes criticism. So what are some of the tools we have that will help us? And I'm going to start with one which I think underpins just about everything that we do, and that is listening well. And this week I've been doing a lot of reading, and on the radio there's been a great deal about the protest movement and the civil rights movement. Saw Selma, and it's interesting and important, I think, to note that almost everything that I have read recently about the kind of tenets of the civil rights movement and other protest movements indicates how important it is to start with listening well. Listening well is something that I've written about as radical listening, which above all is welcoming. It's a kind of listening that neither judges nor prejudges, and importantly, it hears what's not being said as much as it's listening for what's present. It pauses when words fail with a clarity that often it's precisely when words fail that something very important is trying to be articulated, is trying to be communicated. And it certainly discerns when the speaker is off-center, unable to share her story authentically. And I think often an inability to speak authentically derives from ways we get caught up by normative discourses, so that we end up distorting ourselves in the effort to try to make our experience fit normative discourse. So I think radical listening also has as one of its activities hearing when, listening for when something is said formulaically, and identifying the discourses that may be shaping the speaker's packaging of her experience. So here's an example where somebody listened well and responded later, wasn't able to respond in the moment. A former veterinary surgeon who is the executive director of rural development in a province in India was taking a rickshaw, as he had countless times before. And of course, if you're riding in a rickshaw that's being pulled by someone, this is an example of being a witness to structural violence. And the man had been a witness to this, but an oblivious witness really, for years. But this time he asked the rickshaw driver several questions. He said, "How many years have you been pulling a rickshaw? And why don't you own one? And how much do you pay for rent for this one?" And the man's answer stayed with him. And then he began to ask other rickshaw drivers. And over time, he realized that he could do something, and he developed a loan program so that instead of renting rickshaws, these men could pay off a loan, eventually to buy the rickshaw. It took 440 days, but then they owned the rickshaw, and when they did, they got an ID, a uniform, an accident, and health insurance. Longer version of this story can be found on the Ashoka website. So that's an example where by listening well, he realized that he had a set of tools by which he could make a difference in not just this one man's life, but in a social problem of structural violence that existed in that portion of India, perhaps all over India. So listening well will be embedded in every one of the next set of practices I'm going to mention. And these practices draw on strengths that we all have as therapists, and they translate therapeutic skills into everyday practices. And the 4 that I'm going to talk about, I think I have time, are reflection, accompaniment, acknowledgement, and locating and honoring small acts of resistance. So let me start with reflection. Well, we each have an opportunity in all parts of our lives to bring forward, to underscore, to articulate, to make visible the meaning and importance of other people's utterances, gestures, and actions. And that's something that we are trained to know how to do. And of course, what we choose to reflect back to someone is consequential. Now, for the most part so far, I've been giving examples with adults. So here's one with children. My granddaughter has a new baby sister. And 2 days in a row recently, she threw a tantrum, which is violence with a very small v, about going to school. And the second day, her mother said to her, "You know, it's wonderful that you want to spend time with your baby sister and me. It shows how excited you are that she's home with us now. So let's plan something fun to do this afternoon when I pick you up." And my granddaughter then said, "Can Rosie come to my school so I can show her to my friends and my teachers?" And that dissolved the problem. Her mother did not reflect back to her that she was dawdling, making the morning hard for her, or any of the other things that she might have, which were also true. But instead, she reflected back to her that she cared about her sister. Marie Natalie Baudouin has 2 books that I think are excellent for helping parents and therapists consider what kinds of reflections are helpful to children. And again, the point I want to make is that we have the skills to reflect well, but what we choose to reflect, again, is consequential for people. The next practice, everyday practice that I want to talk about is accompaniment, which I think is what most people want. There are many kinds of suffering, obviously, but I think for the most part, when people suffer, what they want is not solutions, but accompaniment on the journey. They want to feel less alone. I have a couple now who are in their late 70s, and they are having increasing medical problems, and they're confronting mortality really for the first time. There have been numerous violations that they've experienced in relation to the healthcare system, both from institutions and from providers. And I accompany them through the conversations they now must have with each other. And I'm comfortable talking about death and dying. I may feel sad for them, but I can stay aware and empowered through these very difficult end-of-life conversations. But accompaniment is something that happens in our daily life as well. I recently was in a group situation with 5 young women, all of whom we were talking together. I was facilitating or stewarding a conversation about work-family dilemmas. And one of the women said that the mother of one of her daughter's classmates had died of a brain tumor the week before. And so she was really thinking about this question of what she wanted to do, not so much balance, but kind of how to think through work-family decisions in the context of heightened awareness of mortality. And then she sort of stopped herself and she said, "I hope that isn't too heavy for this group. I hope, I hope I haven't closed the conversation down." And people reassured her, as did I, and said, "No, of course that's a conversation that we want to be able to have, and we can accompany you in that conversation, in going there, in connecting feelings and thoughts you have about mortality to the question of how you want to think through what you do with work and with family." The third practice that I want to talk about is acknowledgement. Now, the other day I was on the subway platform, and there was a section of the platform that was cordoned off, and there was a policewoman who was looking through what looked like a shoebox, and it turned out that the shoebox had been abandoned on a bench, and so she was looking through it to make sure that it didn't have any explosives in it. And you know, she finished going through what she needed to do, the various checks that she needed to do, and then you know, removed the barrier. And as she was walking away, I said, "Thank you for keeping us safe." Well, she stopped, and she turned and she cocked her head and she said, "Thank you. You have no idea how much that helps." That was a very simple acknowledgement. A while back, I had another experience with acknowledgement. I had lost an earring that I had bought, not one of these, in 1993, and it wasn't at all expensive, but it was very versatile, and so I wore it a lot. So I went back to the store where I had bought it, but they didn't have anything comparable. And I was walking down the street, and I saw that there was another jewelry store, and not actually one that I had seen on that street before. And I went in, and it turned out that the very woman who's Tibetan, who had sold me the pair of earrings that I was looking to replace, was working there. So I was delighted, and I showed her the remaining earring and told her I was looking for another black earring, but that it didn't have to be all black, since I had taken to heart what she had told me at the time, which was by then about 10 years before. I said to her, "You said to me, plain black looks better set off by something contrasting." Well, she looked at me with wide, dark eyes as she knelt to take a pair of earrings from a low shelf, and she said, "Thank you for telling me that." And I was just sort of, you know, gabbing on, saying, "Well, it's true. Actually, I remember everything you said to me," which also was true. I had bought 2 other items from her. And she got up from where she was bending, and she faced me, and she said, "I was trafficked here." And I'm sure I startled as I have just even repeating the anecdote, and I said, "Excuse me?" And she said, "I know this is very hard to hear, but I was trafficked here." Well, of course, I was stunned, but I wasn't paralyzed, and I did do something, a very small something. I thanked her for telling me. And then she shared more of her story over the next few minutes. And then she showed me another pair of earrings, and I said, "Whatever you choose for me, I will buy, and I will remember this conversation for the rest of my life." So every bit of what I did was small. I told her that I had remembered what she had said to me, and yet obviously to her it meant that I had seen her as a person of value, and that her opinions had mattered to me. She then confided in me a profoundly significant part of her life's journey, while, as a visitor to her store, I was surrounded by evidence of a very different part of that journey. I then thanked her for telling me she had been trafficked. And you know, there was a bonus for me. I experienced vicarious resilience. This is a term for the positive meaning-making growth and transformations in the therapist's experience, resulting from exposure to clients' resilience in the course of therapeutic processes addressing trauma and recovery. This is a construct in an article in Family Process that Pilar Hernandez-Wolf and her colleagues published in 2010. But I believe that by using these practices in everyday life, actually we also create opportunities to experience vicarious resilience in our daily lives. And then the fourth practice that I want to talk about is locating and honoring small acts of resistance. So I've been diagnosed and treated for cancer 3 times. And the 3rd time I was diagnosed on the day that my book tour for Common Shock, the book that Vicki held up, should have started. And so instead of going on tour, I was planning more surgery and my radiation treatment schedule. So on the 5th day of radiation, I had a eureka moment. And I decided I would dedicate each of my treatments to a person or a cause whose work in relation to violence I wish to honor. And I hope that the knowledge that someone cared enough about the work they were doing to dedicate their treatment to them would encourage them in the daily challenges they faced. So for the next 25 days of my treatment, I researched people and organizations to write them letters that would truly witness their work. I labored over each letter and brought them in so that the technicians who were doing my radiation would know what or to whom I was dedicating each session. And you can read this about the treatment dedication project on my website and its companion project as well. So Joni, one of the technicians, was very interested in what I was doing. And one day, she had a story to tell me. It was a stormy December evening, and she arrived at the train station very late, and she ordered a sandwich. And then she realized that she had given some of her money to a colleague, and actually that she didn't have enough to pay for her food. The clerk said to her, "Oh, don't bother, it's okay." She felt really embarrassed, but she knew she had a long trip ahead, and so she took the sandwich. And then Joni said this, "I thought of you. I thought to myself, I will dedicate this experience to homeless people who often feel shame when they're hungry." Joni decided symbolically to act in solidarity with homeless people by dedicating to them her receiving a handout of food. It was a small act of resistance to the shaming of homeless people, a ubiquitous violation. And of course, when we witness homelessness, we're witnessing yet another manifestation of structural violation. So I want to end with 2 other points. And I should say before I speak about the first of the 2 next points that I created this webinar in December before the events in Nigeria and Paris had happened. So I was thinking primarily of the Black Lives Matter protests about Ferguson, Staten Island, Cleveland, the deaths of Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Eric Garner, Tamir Rice, and I want to say that I think these events have created a movement of people who are experiencing moral injury. And that moral injury is integrally related to the witnessing model and helps explain what can happen to people who witness certain kinds of acts. So I'm going to start with a very small episode, but I think it does illustrate moral injury. And it's an anecdote which is actually, I think, in the opening paragraph of Common Shock. I was pushing my 8-year-old goddaughter on a swing at a park when she saw a father hit a child. And she got off the swing. She said, I need to stop. I want to go home. And I think the incident crossed her moral boundary. She experienced moral injury. I think returning vets tell us stories all the time about moral injury. People in the Occupy movement, and some of you may have read the latest statistic that the figures are showing that 1% of people in the world now control 50% of global wealth. And I think the Black Lives Matter protests are experiencing moral injury. So while moral injury is a relatively new concept, the construct, the experience of moral injury has been known and written about as far back as the Iliad. It is an act of serious transgression that leads to inner conflict because the experience is at odds with core ethical and moral beliefs. More specifically, moral injury has been defined as perpetrating, failing to prevent, bearing witness to, or learning about acts that transgress deeply held moral beliefs and expectations. And I think importantly, at least for this webinar and the points that I've been trying to make, it's really clear that acts of commission as well as omission can set the stage for the development of moral injury. And just an interesting slide of the differences between PTSD and moral injury. You see areas of overlap and experiences of sorrow, grief, regret, shame, and alienation that characterize moral injury. And then the last point that I want to make, and then we'll have time for comments and questions, is about reasonable hope, where so far I've been sort of talking about actions that individuals can take, with the exception, of course, of the Black Lives Matters protests, and this really allows me to make a link to reasonable hope. And the article Reasonable Hope will be available on the Family Process website. Hope is often talked about as an internal characteristic feeling of one individual. But in my writing, really what I've been talking about is the importance of reasonable hope as something people do together, as an emerging capacity of a community. And I will leave you with the following thought. How can we help to influence the capacity of a community to do reasonable hope together? How do we influence that into becoming? Okay, look forward to talking with you. Vicki?
I'm coming. I'm here. It just takes a minute for everything to happen. So I'm looking. You didn't show your bibliography. You didn't show all those wonderful articles that people can get.
Well, they are there. There, so they'll be up on the website.
They'll be up on the website. They'll be up as part of the presentation. And at the end of this webinar, I will be showing people the Family Process Wiley Online Library homepage. And at that point, I will show people how they can access your articles and download them for free for 30 days. So we will be able to do that. So I'm just going to do a couple of quick questions that people have asked, just so that we can make sure that we answer them and I don't forget. someone wants to know what the title of the book is about boosting children's self-esteem, the book by Marie-Natalie Baudouin.
There was a slide for that. The Skillionaire in Every Child, I think, is...
The Skillionaire in Every Child is one of them, yeah. And the other one, see if I can find it.
There. Skillionaire in Every Child.
Yeah.
And the other one is Boosting All Children's Social and Emotional Brain Power.
All right, okay. And then someone else was asking about the title of your books, and this one is one of them, Common Shock, which now I don't know what the other one was that people were referring to. I showed another one at the beginning of the webinar, which you didn't talk about, but it's...
but that's definitely a book which is about the application of constructs that we work with all the time in clinical practice to family life. And in fact, articles that appear on Family Process, I'm not sure they're going to be up on the website, on intimacy. I'm really talking about the everyday ways of thinking about intimacy and family life.
Yeah, those are on the website, and I'm going to show those too. So those are available. Rather than my asking questions, I want to privilege the questions coming from the attendees. So there's one here right now that says, can you share some examples of communities where it may be useful to research evidence of reasonable hope? Now, that was your last conversation about reasonable hope.
Where
useful to research examples of communities where it may be useful to research evidence of reasonable hope.
Well, I think that the construct of reasonable hope is one that many of my South African colleagues have worked with extensively, and have the construct precisely because it really emphasizes the collective, seems to map on and work very well with the South African construct of Ubuntu. And in work that I've done over the years working with people in South African communities, particularly communities very, very hard hit by the AIDS pandemic, it's clear that people have worked together as a community to take care of orphan children. There are wonderful community efforts in townships, outside of townships. There's an anecdote that I didn't have time to go into, but there's an orphanage outside of Cape Town called Fikalela, and they work, the entire community comes together to sustain AIDS orphans. So I think that there are many, many places in the world. There was I actually can't exactly remember. I think maybe we thought of it as an example. There's an extraordinary DVD that's now available, or a performance that's available now on YouTube, of a Italian, I think it's the Italian Philharmonic, playing a performance of the Mozart Requiem in Sarajevo in 1994, where the war is still ongoing, and musicians come and they play in the ruins of the National Library, and the entire community is uplifted by this absolutely glorious music being shared. Sorry. That's your cat. By people. So yes, I think there are many, many examples of reasonable hope manifest in community settings.
So, Kaethe, the article you wrote with Elmarie Coetzee, In the Wake of Violence, are there examples in that?
Yes, I mean, I think, yes, absolutely. Yeah. That would be
so that article will also be available, so I think that's something people can read. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking for other questions and I'm not seeing any. Let's see, here's one. You mentioned that someone can be aware and disempowered. You mentioned the news reporter that was frozen and did not respond. Do you have anything to share to help someone get out of that frozen state in that moment and move into the empowered state?
Yeah, and that is really one of the things that I was trying to talk about, which is that sometimes people are searching for something big that they can do. In that instance, saying something that might encompass everything about the situation that the UNICEF ambassador was speaking about. And the task that they are setting for themselves is overwhelming. So in that situation, one of the things that I think people can do is to ask themselves, what is one small thing that I can do? In the example that I gave with the Tibetan woman in the store with the earring, she had just said to me, I was trafficked here. And it was very out of context. It might not have been, and it wouldn't have been out of context if she had been a client of mine sitting in an office, but I was in a jewelry store. And if I had been thinking, I have to solve the problem of trafficking, I have to solve her experience, her total experience of having been trafficked here, I would have been paralyzed. But my belief was, what can I say in this moment that acknowledges what she has said to me? And I felt that the best thing that I could offer was to say to her, thank you for telling me that. In other words, I wanted her to know that I was open, I was receptive. I wasn't going to recoil from her having come out with such a profound and disturbing piece of personal information. So that is what I think people can do. They can think of what is something small that they can do that will make a difference. Certainly, Paula, faced with the knowledge that her friend's father had cancer, she couldn't cure cancer. She couldn't cure the situation, but she could do something that was recognizing of friendship, and that's what she did. She said, I really care about you, and here are pictures of the pancakes that we made. And the point is that it did make a difference. So I think that's how people get out of the disempowered position, is that they think, what is a small thing that I can do? And the point here is that small is not trivial.
So here's an interesting question that follows right up on what you just said, which is timely. This person says, I'm concerned with the reasonableness of hopelessness. I'm not sure what that means, but for example, if I'm concerned about justice for Michael Brown or Trayvon Martin, it seems unlikely that I can affect change in that situation in a meaningful way. I can attend protests, I can read articles, I can share information, I can educate people, I can listen to the people affected by police violence, but I may still feel profoundly disempowered in my ability to affect meaningful change by my small acts. I don't know what to do with the hopelessness that feels reasonable. Sometimes the small acts don't seem like enough.
Well, I would say that that in a way this is an existential question, and it's a personal internal calculation or judgment call. And for me, it's a both and. I am ready to accept that I am not going to be able to change the world. I'm not going to be able to make major changes in critical problems like climate change or income inequality or the race relations in this country. But at the same time, I'm not willing to accept that not making a profound difference, a significant difference, means that it's hopeless to do something small. And I think that the history of social movements, I mean, after all, protests did stop the war in Vietnam. And the march in Selma did accelerate the pace of the Voting Rights Act. I think it is the case that sustained acts by many, many people, even if each individual act is small, they do make a difference.
It reminds me, if I can add to that, it reminds me of something I heard a long time ago when someone was talking about a project, a small project of some kind to help people. And the person who was hearing about it said, but it's so small, it's just like a drop in the bucket. And the person said, at least it's a drop in the bucket. And I think that's what you're saying. I mean,
yeah, but I also think that the person's saying the reasonableness of hopelessness. I mean, it is reasonable to feel hopeless about turning everything around by one person, on the one hand. And on the other hand, you know, this is a metaphor that if a mosquito, well, you take a huge ocean liner, and if a mosquito bites the ear of the person who's steering the ship, or I guess ships are probably not steered anymore, the person who's pushing the computer program, and a different button is pushed, then yes, it's possible for the ocean liner to change course. So the question is, how do we become the mosquito in the ear? And what's our tolerance for doing, you know, biting lots of ears before the ocean liner turns?
So here's a question that's similar to one that was asked before, but it's, how do we access awareness when we are frozen in the disempowered area? So I imagine that we're in the disempowered, unaware, and move to aware and then move to empowered, I suppose.
Right. So, I mean, I do think that being aware of what there is to be aware of is a ongoing, continuous process. And there are some situations that some of us are more likely to have awareness or skill, either skills or life experience that allows us to be aware. And then there's some situations where there is a learning curve. I think being open to what we don't know, but staying present in order to learn more about what we don't know, is the way that we continually increase awareness of very challenging, difficult situations, race being one that comes to mind. And there's a lot of really interesting work that's being described about certain kinds of almost innate, but certainly learned biases that prejudice our ability to know fully what it is that we're knowing and responding to. But I think it's just a question of hanging in, keeping on, and tolerating when we get feedback that we didn't know what we probably should have known or could have known or what other people know. It's a continuous process of being receptive and open to being more aware of what there is to see, to hear, to learn, to know.
Mm-hmm. So, other questions? I think you're answering everybody's questions. No other questions. So let me do this while we might get another question before we're done, but we have only about 10 more minutes. So what I'm going to do is show people how they can access your articles, and then you can think about what else you might want to say before we finish, Kaethe. So let me do that while So I'm going to show people, I don't know if it's up yet. Hopefully it is. I'm going to show people the website for Family Process. And this is how you can get to it if you don't know how to get to it, is go to whatever your browser search function is, and I'm up here at that, and type in Family Process. And it will come up Family Process official site. And if you click on that, it will take you right back to what I just showed you. And this is the home page for the current article, the current issue, which is the December issue. But what I want to show you is if you go over to the left-hand side and you go down to where it says virtual issues, this is going to be the easiest way to obtain Dr. Weingarten's article. So click on virtual issues. There are several virtual issues here. You'll see the one, Narrative Therapy in the 21st Century and Early Approaches to Narrative and Post-Structural Thinking. Now, for some reason, it's not clicking and going down, so you have to scroll down to it. So if you scroll down to Narrative Therapy in the 21st Century, a tribute to Michael White, if you go down, you'll see Weingarten's work on witnessing and hope. And here are the articles that in many ways, in different ways, reflect what Kaethe just talked about today. So here's Reasonable Hope, Construct, Critical Applications and Supports. If you click on that, that article will come up and you'll be able to access it. If you go to Sorrow, a therapist's reflection on the inevitable and the unknowable, you'll be able to get that, The Cruel Radiance of What Is. And then the article I mentioned, In the Wake of Violence, Enacting and Witnessing Hope Among People. That's by Omri Kaethe, Therese Hume, I don't know how to say that name, Geldenhuis, and Kaethe Weingarten. If you go down to the virtual issue on early approaches to narrative, you'll see Kaethe Weingarten's work that she just talked about, The Discourses of Intimacy. That's actually the way I first got to know Kaethe Weingarten, is by reading that article, which came out in 1991, and it made me want to get to know her better. So all of these articles are also, I don't know if they're all available, Kaethe, I'll have to find out, but certainly the ones that I showed you before, these 4 articles are available. So I encourage you to go to that website and, you know, access those articles. I think you'll be quite happy to read them, because I think sometimes what happens, at least it happens with me, is I can hear something, but I need to read it also. So here's something else I want to show you in the Family Process homepage. If you scroll down to the bottom, you can click on the Family Process 1 channel. Now, John Lawless told you how to access that. You just go to YouTube and search for Family Process. Family Process 1 is actually what it's called. Family Process 1 YouTube channel. Here it is. So there are several possibilities for you to, you know, to look through the different videos. The webinars that we have, hashtag FPR webinars, there are 2 videos that are up now, and Dr. Weingarten's will be there also. But also you can find Dr. Weingarten's articles. Let's see if I can find it. If you look at March, is it March 2013, Kaethe, that you're, I think it's March 2013 that we have, yeah, The Cruel Radiance of What Is. If you were to click on that, you'd have,
hello, my name is Kaethe Weingarten.
You'd have that video that you could look at. So there are lots and lots of possibilities for you to access Dr. Weingarten's work, and, you know, I encourage you to do that in, you know, whatever way it makes sense to you. So with that being said, you can take me off of show screen, I think, Jason, and I'll come back and talk with people. Stop showing screen. Okay. So, anything you want to add, Kaethe, about what I just showed, or anything you want to, that you were thinking about that you wanted to? Oh, here's another question. Do you want another question?
Sure.
It says, I'm curious if you might have a response to the phenomenon of the marketing of hope, self-help industry, etc. I just lost it. how capitalist intention can corrupt the moral intention, integrity, and how this can spurn disappointment and disillusionment.
Well, I think it's, you know, in the article Reasonable Hope, I am really, I would say, directly speaking to the issues that are embedded in that question. And the way I see it, thinking about hope as a feeling that some people have and some people don't have really is a commodification of hope, and it lends itself to an industry that plays on people's desires to have more hope, as if hope is a quantity, an internal quantity. You know, people have more, they have less. So I do think that's highly problematic. On the other hand, there's very good evidence that shows that individuals, people, communities that are high in hope actually are more resilient. They're able to withstand adversity better. So I think that it's really important for people to, let's say, for the moment, have hope. But in fact, and in the way I think about it, it's very much not a commodity. It's something that we do. It's a practice. And I do think that it's a practice that's better done with other people than conceptualized as a practice that we do on our own. So the entire construct of reasonable hope, as I write about it in that paper that is available on the Family Process website, is to counter the commodification of hope.
That's great. Nice last question. Let me just do a little commercial here before I finish. This is the first webinar of this year. We have 5 more already available, and I will be sending that out as on Facebook and also on listservs, and we'll send it to everybody that's attending this webinar. We have Jean Malpa the end of February. We have Celia Falico the end of March. We have Ruben Potter Cardona in the middle of May, and D. Watts Jones in the middle of September. I hope to have something in mid-June and also in mid-October. So this is, as I said recently, these webinars have some traction, and I hope that you think about attending some more of them. So I want to thank Kaethe Weingarten one more time. This was packed. It was rich. It was full of many years of thinking and researching and writing and doing and living, and it's just wonderful to have you present this, Kaethe. I love it. So thank you very much, and thank you everyone who came. Are you turning us off, Jason?